Are you curious what goes on inside the mind of someone living with a form of schizophrenia? It's unlikely a person in the thick of it could explain it cleanly. The illness itself gets in the way, and people with schizophrenia don't always realize their mind is unwell. About the hallucinations. Movies like to show apparitions and strangers and creatures popping up, solid as life, as if they're part of the room. But most of the time, the visions and voices happen inside the head. People with these disorders may lose the ability to separate reality from delusion, yet they can still tell you the voice is in their head, not, say, coming from the toilet. Same with the visuals. They often know there's a difference between an illusion and a real object, and experience the visions as a curse laid on them, images someone has slipped into their skull. There are times, though, when the images are woven into the world so perfectly that you can see, for instance, your brother, your long-dead father standing in front of you and count every button on his blazer. That kind exists, but it's rare. They're called true hallucinations. I'm one of the lucky few who drew that card. As I said, people with schizophrenia usually insist they're fine and interpret the voices and images as mystical phenomena. That's why it's so hard for psychiatrists to get someone onto a path toward treatment. I, on the other hand, figured out I was losing my mind even before my first appointment. It didn't help me act like a healthy person. I got swallowed by my delusions and couldn't control anything, and when an episode ended, I could immediately tell it had all been hallucination. Imagine you're asleep and dreaming. No matter how absurd it gets, you don't suspect you're dreaming until you wake, and then the impossibility of what you saw becomes obvious. That's what happened to me. Only, I was awake. Most often, I saw people. I call them my guests. Almost always they were unpleasant. They stirred fear, disgust, or hatred. The one I hated most was a bald man who showed up more than once. Imagine how stupid I felt, realizing the thing I most despised in the world didn't even exist. I met him first in the waiting hall of a bus terminal. I was slouched in a plastic chair, killing time, scrolling through pictures on my phone, when he walked up to me. He planted himself right in front of me. He was short, too skinny for his suit, old trousers hitched high and cinched tight with a belt. His nose looked like a ripe lemon, pores like craters. His cheeks were pitted. His bald scalp shone. Only at the temples did ashy hair stick out. He cast a shadow and looked no less real than anyone else around me. I figured he'd ask me for a cigarette, but he silently folded his hands behind his back and, like a cheap circus magician, produced a filthy rag from no where, shook it open in my face and tossed it at me. The gray rag draped over my right arm. I don't remember whether I felt it touch me, but I'll never forget the stench. It reeked of rotten eggs, urine, feces, carrion, every nauseating smell you can name. I don't know how I didn't just retch on the spot. I jumped up and started spinning, shaking my arm. A worried woman ran over. She thought I needed help, grabbed my shoulder, probably afraid I'd fall, and shouted into my ear, "What's happening?" "The rag! Get this rag off me," I yelled. And even as I shouted, it dawned on me there was no rag and no bald man. I was just thrashing in panic in the middle of a bus station with dozens of people watching. The woman let go of my shoulder, and I watched her face change. She realized I wasn't okay and regretted rushing in to help a crazy person. "Ah, a rag. Got it," she said, her tone now completely different. It wasn't my first episode, but it was the first time anyone called me crazy. They weren't wrong. I take my meds. I can go years without seeing my guests, but I will never know what it's like to be normal. I'm not even sure normal exists. Knowing what I know about mental illness, I'm convinced there are more people who mistakenly think they're healthy than people who mistakenly think they're sick. My arm stank for days after that rag. The first day I couldn't eat. The smell made me nauseous. The skin on my arm dried out because I kept washing up to the elbow with soap. The smell was imaginary, I knew that. But for a while, I could smother it with the scent of soap. I don't remember when all this started. Maybe in early childhood. In kindergarten, I told kids that a tiger man lived in the bushes by the fence. He was covered in fur and stripes, had an animal's muzzle but human eyes. Human hands, too. Only hairy, with sharp claws. The tiger man was frightening. But he didn't hurt anyone. He had no friends. And he was always sad. I don't remember now if I actually saw him or just believed my own inventions. The tiger man could have been my first guest. I have the feeling I saw him. The other kids didn't. But I scared them badly with my stories. Because of me, the kindergarten held a meeting. They called in my parents, spoke to them sternly, complained that thanks to my lies, the children weren't sleeping well, and kept crying. My mom and dad stood up for me. They said a unique way of seeing and a big imagination are gifts most children have. That's how it's supposed to be. That's how kids grow. Adults crush those talents because they're inconvenient. I have good parents. So much love and kindness in them. And what did they get in return? Me. They drew a short straw. Episodes. One early morning I was crossing the city park. On one of the pavilions a group of people sat. I couldn't walk past. My legs carried me to them on their own. My hallucinations always seemed to have a script, and I play my part with no way to alter the plot. I stepped onto the pavilion and sat at the edge of a bench. The people there looked awful. The last stop of alcoholism, pickled through and through. Their faces were swollen, eyes barely visible above the puffiness, yet they spoke coherently. I was just an observer among them. They didn't notice me. A woman sat with them, as ruined-looking as the men. She was missing her front teeth. Her knuckles were scabbed. She said not only had she drunk herself away, she'd taught her son Vanya to drink too. As a teenager, he'd started drinking with his mother, side by side. The others nodded, listening, asking her not to torment herself with guilt. She went on. And then I had a miscarriage. The men dropped their eyes. She flicked her hand. Maybe that's for the best. That baby was Vanya's. I sat there, listening, unable to leave. Degeneration is the price of vice, one of the drunks said. No accusation, just a bleak conclusion. Those words, degeneration, is the price of vice. I didn't even grasp them right away. How did my broken brain come up with that line? Later, I wondered if I'd heard it somewhere. Maybe a quotation. I searched it on Google, in quotes and without. Nothing. It still amazes me how my guests can be so detailed, so self-contained, as if they live their own lives, independent of me. I was hospitalized only once, voluntarily. 6 weeks in a psychiatric clinic. I thought the constant supervision would make me healthier. I was wrong. In captivity, among people as unmoored as I am, I get worse. After that, I was treated at home, taking prescriptions. The guests can stay away for many months, even a year, and a new episode is always a sign it's time to adjust the meds. If I'm lucky, I catch it in time. The first warning is an acute sense of smell. Suddenly everything reeks. The potting soil and flower pots. The cigarette smoke by my building's entrance. Every person on the street has a distinct scent, each passerby dragging a wake of it behind them. Not faint, but strong enough to punch the nose. The moment I catch that, I head straight to my doctor. Still, episodes sometimes arrived out of nowhere. I worked at a small public sector office. I didn't want to live off my parents or scrape by on a disability check. The pay was peanuts. Most of my coworkers were retirees. I was just grateful to have something to do. The first time I got lucky and had an episode at work, I was alone. I was at my desk checking spreadsheets when a man in a bright blue blazer, white shirt, and red bow tie came into the office. As he walked, he buttoned the top button of his blazer, flicked his lapels, and chirped, "Well, shall we have some fun?" I swore at him. He frowned disapprovingly and sidestepped to make room for the others. There were a lot of them. Dressed-up men and women flooded the office. Black tails, loud dresses, faces powdered and painted. I realized they were theater actors on intermission, stopping by to relax before the Kiowai's sei. I felt ashamed for cursing. I squeezed through the crowd to find the man I'd insulted. I saw a blue back, tugged a shoulder, and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude." The man turned. Not him. Same blazer, same bow tie, but younger. He looked puzzled. He had no idea why I was apologizing. Realizing I'd mistaken him for someone else, I turned to go back to my chair. A mature woman in an elaborate, vaguely Eastern costume blocked my way and held out a tray with thin slices of pink meat. "Try it," she said. "It's our traditional dish." I reached to take a slice, but she wagged a finger. Not how it's done. I was supposed to eat straight from the plate. I bent down, picked up a slice with my teeth, chewed, but tasted nothing. That's when it clicked. I was in the middle of an episode, and then I was standing in an empty office, and there was nothing in my mouth. Everything had vanished. As always, snapping out of it, I had only one plan: run home, double my dose, sleep it off, and see my doctor first thing in the morning. Another time, months later, it hit in the middle of the workday. Someone was pounding on the front door from the street. My coworkers didn't answer. I was on edge, wondering who was banging on an unlocked door. I went into the hallway, pushed the door open, and the bald man stepped in. I lurched back. He flung his foul rag at me like a net. It snagged my right shoulder and covered my whole arm. The stench, again. Without blinking, he laughed in my face, showing those ugly yellow teeth. I snapped and lunged at the bastard with my fists. He hadn't expected that and cringed against the wall. I couldn't stop. Suddenly, he started shaking and crashed to the floor. His arms and legs jerked. Yellow foam, same color as his teeth, bubbled out of his mouth. He convulsed. His eyes were wide open, his teeth clenched, his gums red with blood. I dropped his stinking rag onto him and he stopped thrashing. My anger drained away. I realized what I'd done. He was dead. I'd killed the bald man. I was a murderer. My coworkers came running at the noise. I was standing over a corpse. They stared at me, bewildered. Caught red-handed, I confessed to everything. I cried. Said I hadn't meant to kill him. It just happened. But then I remembered the bald man had always lived only in my head. Relief and regret hit me at once. Relief that I wouldn't have to pay for a killing. Regret that my coworkers had seen me in an episode. They offered me a vacation, some rest. I quit for good. No one there ever looked at me the same way again. My arm didn't just stink for a week. It itched. Red inflammations broke out. No one noticed the smell, but the red patches were real. People asked what was wrong with my arm. I never saw the bald man alive again. That's how my delusions work. If a guest dies, that's final. I didn't see him living, but once more he showed up during a night episode. On my TV. I rarely dream. Sometimes, though, I sleep fitfully and wake for a minute in the small hours. During one of those brief wakings, an episode hit. I opened my eyes and saw I'd left the bedroom TV on. Red-tinted static shimmered on the screen. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and a strange segment came into focus. The bald man, shirtless, strolling among fruit trees. He was in an overgrown garden. A rough wooden gazebo drifted in and out of the frame. The camera's attention was fixed on him. The lens zoomed in and out, cutting between wide shots and close-ups. He didn't look into the camera, but he clearly knew he was being filmed and seemed to pose for the operator, turning sideways, then showing his back, displaying his torso. Eczema and sores mottled his skin. The whole thing was shot on a cheap camcorder in a 4.3 aspect ratio. I watched and thought, that's the very man I killed. I felt sick at the sight, and heavy with guilt. I was mourning a man who had never existed. My hallucinations almost always fool me. Once I had a conversation with a 200-year-old grandpa who complained about how useless he was. He said that 100 years ago, he'd already been very old and couldn't remember his youth anymore, as if it had never existed. I told him that even though I was young, I too sometimes felt useless because I had schizophrenia. And as I said it, I realized I was in another episode, and the old man was only in my head. Once, I had a girlfriend. My diagnosis didn't scare her. Neither did my medication-blunted libido. She loved me, and I broke up with her. Because she believed I wasn't ill. She said I had a gift for seeing more than other people. That most of us have blind spots in our vision, and never take in the whole picture. While I could see and sense beings beyond human understanding. She told me to stop taking my meds and embrace what was in me. Learn to live with it. I left her. I told her I didn't love her anymore and didn't want to see her again. That was a lie. The truth is, I don't want to become one of those people who believe their hallucinations are real. I want to be healthy. Healthy as anyone with my condition can be.